Yeah, I remember the standard things, like, green, brown, yellow, white, black, things like that. But these new colors they got, like.
What if the greatest voice you've ever heard was missing the one thing that makes music matter? When Ray Charles heard Justin Timberlake sing, he didn't critique the notes. He questioned the soul behind them. Not the pitch, the pain, not the polish, the purpose. Because Ray wasn't just listening, he was searching for scars, for struggle, for stories that couldn't be faked. There was a moment back in October 2002, on a quiet autumn afternoon in a Sunset Boulevard studio, when Ray Charles seemed to vanish behind more than his sunglasses. He sat still, eyes closed, but not in sync with music. The room pulsated with anticipation. Then came a question that felt like a grenade. What do you think of Elvis Presley? The silence that followed carried more weight than any roar. He opened his mouth, voice measured but sharp. Don't ask me no more questions about Elvis. That whisper, heavy with history, marked the beginning of a confession that would rip open a truth rarely spoken on camera. Ray wasn't targeting individuals through hate, but he was dismantling a system. To him, Elvis wasn't a legend. He was the prophet from a performance built on borrowed art. He didn't deny Elvis's talent. He just refused the crown, calling it the final roar of an old lion, an emblem of how black artists laid tracks through gospel churches and segregated clubs, only for white voices to ride those same rhythms into mainstream gold. Ray knew firsthand what it meant, and what it cost. The tragedy wasn't that Elvis grew famous, it was that the voices feeding that fame remained unnamed. Ray's voice carried that weight. He watched as a young white man from Tupelo sang Hound Dog and Tutti Frutti with polished ease, sliding those same chords into middle-class living rooms, while the originals were ignored. Not theft, Ray said. More like silence. And when Pat Boone's sugar-coated versions topped charts, he didn't scoff at Boone himself. He scoffed at a system that celebrated Boone while sidelining Fats Domino, Big Mama Thornton, and others. Ray remembered hearing Boone's version of Ain't That a Shame on the radio and laughing. Empty, he called it, like someone reading someone else's words without feeling a pulse behind them. Boone did no wrong personally. He was just the benefactor of what Ray called a quiet injustice. Boone shook his hand at an honor event in 1983, but Ray turned away. He said later in that closed-door moment, I don't know him, I just know his voice played instead of my friends. That line pierced far deeper than any rant ever could. And then, the next wave? Michael Bolton. With a tremor held for decades, Ray watched Bolton climb, a white crooner praised for channeling soul and pain. Emotion Ray had already carried in his fingertips and vocal cords. When Ray performed Georgia on My Mind, he bled history behind every note. When Bolton sang it, the applause was polite, detached. No Grammy for Ray? The room seemed to echo that question, unanswered. Backstage at an award show, they lined up artists billed as new inheritors of Ray's legacy. The camera found Bolton first. Ray nodded politely, but inside he fractured. How do you inherit a life you never lived? He wrote that in his notebook afterwards. For him, a voice wasn't just sound, it contained weight. Ancestors, pain, rejection, triumph. And Bolton carried the same notes, polished clean of struggle. Ray didn't say he was angry. He said he was disappointed at a world ready to celebrate surface without origin. This wasn't envy. Ray had nothing but empathy for him, but professionals called them smoldering embers. Silent, searing, faintly glowing in Ray's heart. He'd whisper backstage, they gave it a new name. And the system cheered at the facade, never questioning who the real composer of that soul might be. He wasn't shouting, he was recounting. In an unearthed interview, he shot back at a reporter who dared to praise Elvis as revolutionary. I know too many artists far greater than Elvis. He was doing the Willie Mae Thornton jailhouse rock. That's black music. He didn't mince words. He didn't need to. His truth resonated far beyond a soundbite, and recent research shows this isn't a 50s problem alone. Columbia's 2024 review into copyright laws noted that cultural appropriation is a long tradition, from blues to hip-hop, from gospel to AI-generated tracks today. Ray's argument echoes through that line of history. If original black voices aren't valued, future reproductions always win. So here's the question that dawns on you now. Is music truly about melody, or is it about the stories, the scars, the people behind each note? Ray argued that what the mainstream calls innocent crossover often amounts to forgotten origin. Elvis didn't sing Hound Dog first, but he was the one who took home the crown from a system built on silencing the actual creators. Big Mama Thornton called her royalties, just $500 once. Elvis sold millions. And when she sang Hound Dog live, she stopped mid-performance and threw the spotlight back where it belonged, reminding crowds of the music's lineage. These weren't isolated incidents, just the visible lines in a broader pattern. Ray's revolution wasn't loud. It didn't ignite riots, it simmered. He kept performing, kept pushing boundaries. He built ownership into his record contracts. First black artist to own his masters, a move that reshaped artist rights forever. He refused segregated stages, paid attention to civil rights, wrote soulful albums like Modern Sounds and country and western music that crossed genres and broke stereotypes. All this despite losing sight at 7, losing his brother, wrestling addiction, fighting hospital debts. He emerged pushing the world to listen differently. He insisted a song belonged to those who felt it first, not those who polished it later. It wasn't drama, it was justice, in notes and contracts, in studio recordings and concert refusals. So when Ray whispered that question, how do you inherit a life you never lived? It wasn't bitterness, it was memory. Memory of church halls where black voices trembled with resistance, clubs where R&B riffs carried defiance, mothers who taught him piano by ear, tearing through grief. He knew that every note had a story, and when those notes were recast without that story, the echo lost its soul. He didn't call for canceling artists. He called for awareness, for honesty, for naming roots, for respect, for justice. And there, in the hush of that October afternoon, the real finale hovered. Ray hadn't left behind a cash-soaked will. He didn't drop a final hit. He left 10 names, names tied to intangible thefts. He handed us a list that forces a pause. Is your favorite song really yours, or is it sourced from someone whose voice was silenced? The camera light dimmed. The room held its breath. Ray Charles leaned forward, eyed the floor, and the silence spoke volumes. And that silence beckoned us, the viewers, to ask, what stories are we missing behind the melodies? As the keys closed on that October confession, the story didn't end. It shifted into the shadows of another quiet revolution. At a New York gathering in 1999 where jazz and soul elders mingled under low lights, Ray Charles leaned heavily on his cane. His eyes, hidden behind iconic shades, carried decades of unspoken truths. He cracked a hint of a smile and then dropped a line so sharp it pierced the chatter. If Charlie Parker came back today and heard what passes for jazz on the radio, he'd toss his horn in the river. A ripple of uneasy laughter echoed. Ray didn't join in. What followed wasn't hate. It was a challenge. Jazz, he declared, is supposed to jar you awake, shake your bones, not lull you into comfort. He never named names on record, but the room knew who the target was. Kenny G's smooth sax had swept across households, wedding receptions, and hotel lounges. Millions called it jazz. Ray called it surrender. By 2025, smooth jazz still held radio real estate, generating tastemakers' quiet revolts and even documentaries dissecting its calm veneer. But to Ray, that sellout version of jazz risked erasing the thrill of Miles Davis's haunting trumpet, or Thelonious Monk's unpredictable rhythms from modern ears. Backstage, he confided to an old drummer friend, "He doesn't break rules, he just makes everything easier." That stung him more than any criticism, because he saw a generation drifting, believing that jazz needed no grit, no challenge. And the heartbreaking part? They didn't even know they were missing something. Jazz wasn't meant to be polite background music. It was fire, friction, life in motion. Later, near the end of his life, in a rare interview, he was asked, "What do you think the future holds for jazz?" Without hesitation, Ray said, "As long as it doesn't get lulled to sleep." And when the question turned to Kenny G, he gave a half smile, like someone asking how he felt about forgetting his own name. "I put it on when I want to forget who I am," he confessed. Not because Kenny G lacked skill, but because his music was too clean, too polished, devoid of scars. Ray grew up playing through fire, orphaned at 15, blind by 7, addiction buried under every note. For him, every melody carried memory. If a song didn't feel alive, it wasn't jazz. That was Ray's pain, a voice that consented to be distilled. He wasn't alone. Reddit threads still brim with jazz fan lamentations. If your first exposure to jazz was Kenny G, you're listening to the wrong station. Critics said he made jazz palatable, even empty. Yet Kenny G sold over 75 million records worldwide. Proof that ease sells even at the cost of essence. But Ray's scrutiny didn't stop with saxophones. He considered vocalists whose pitch was perfect, but whose soul fell flat. Tina Marie, crowned Lady T by fans, carried credentials. Motown ties, praise from Rick James. Yet Ray saw her voice as too polished, too rehearsed. He said she sings like she's been trained, but soul don't come from practice. It comes from pain. That quietly reverberated among musicians, a wound disguised as critique. Some said he was jealous, but Ray wasn't targeting whiteness. He was defending roots. He respected Tina's dedication. He mourned that her performance lacked the regret, fracture, and vulnerability that come only from lived experience. Not everyone he judged left his stage. Some he embraced. Take George Harrison. Ray chose to cover one of George's love songs, finding something raw in the melody. His version bled emotion. Critics loved it. Sinatra said it was haunting. Then George listened. "I liked the bridge," when he said. "The rest didn't feel right. Not enough nuance." Just a sentence void of malice. But for Ray, it was a blow. He noted later that George never asked why he shaped it that way. He simply judged. Ray folded his notebook and never performed that song again. To Ray, music was confession. When someone heard every note and still didn't empathize, it felt like rejection. And if silent disapproval could damage, then George's comment did. Ray said once, "Man, I've played music with people who couldn't hear, but George, he heard everything and felt nothing." Silence, he believed, could be crueler than criticism. He didn't hate George. He just stopped acknowledging him, stopped playing that song. When asked in his final interview why certain covers disappeared, Ray said softly, "Because some people like to keep their love locked up. I don't." It was a confession about vulnerability and about the courage to stay wounded open. Then came the new generation. In 2002, during a studio visit in Los Angeles, a young label rep played Justin Timberlake's first solo single, "Cry Me a River." Ray listened, turned it off. He said, "It's not bad, but it's not alive." The rep asked if there was anything wrong. Ray looked up and asked, "Do you smell cigarette smoke?" Hear broken heart in his voice? See a crack in his soul? The rep laughed. Ray didn't. He once told a friend, "Music isn't for showbiz. It's something you play when no one's watching." To Ray, Justin looked like a star designed to shine. Handsome, tasteful, marketable. But absence of pain meant absence of soul. He wasn't attacking Justin personally, just lamenting the packaging of art as product. Ray walked a tightrope, creating soulful hits, negotiating contracts to own masters, making history in 1959, protesting segregation in Georgia and pioneering crossover country records in 1962. He fought for authenticity, for equity, for respect. He believed music carried legacy. When that legacy was repackaged without awareness, that was cultural erasure. In this saga, names on his list weren't villains. They were symbols. Symbols of a system that celebrated surface, gloss, and sales over the struggle that shaped every chord. Ray knew that the cost of forgetting origins is to lose meaning. And meaning is the blood of any story worth telling. When Ray Charles turned off Justin Timberlake's Cry Me a River in that 2002 studio, it wasn't a rejection of a person, but a statement. This wasn't alive. He asked almost quietly, "Do you smell smoke in his voice? Hear heartbreak in the tone? Feel a crack in the soul?" The rep thought it flippant. Ray didn't. It was a question born of decades spent coaxing life from music, not polishing it for airwaves. He'd grown up hearing the heartbeat in a broken harmonica, felt the grit in piano keys worn raw by a blind boy's fingertips. If songs sound perfect but leave you unmoved, what remains? That trajectory carried him into a rehearsal with Christina Aguilera, a teenage powerhouse holding a note so long the audience leaned forward. She walked into the studio with wide eyes, hungry for approval. Ray complimented her pipes, then paused. "But what are you saying with them?" he asked. Not to cut her down, but to wake her up. Because a voice isn't a trophy, it's a confession. It's a heart laid bare. Aguilera had the technical firepower, but was the flame fueled by pain or performance? Ray wanted the embers, not the spotlight. These moments weren't about judgment. They were emotional guides. This same sensitivity surfaced backstage during a gospel house explosion involving Barry Manilow. Ray heard each note as though it were wrapped in plastic. "Beautiful shell," he muttered, but no soul inside. A producer once offered a duet. Ray declined. "He isn't dirty enough for me," he said, not criticizing Manilow, but defending the textures of real life. The cigarette smoke on the microphone, the cracked voice of early morning rehearsals, the scars that refuse silence. So much of Ray's story centered on authenticity, and the most symbolic conflict came in 1965 when evangelist Billy Graham damned "I Got a Woman." Graham, standing in a Southern Baptist pulpit, said sacred music shouldn't mix with worldly entertainment. Ray didn't respond publicly, but he retreated to the studio, fingers hovering over piano keys for an hour without playing a note. For him, that wasn't just critique. It was a spiritual wound, an erasure of a journey carved by hunger, pain, vision loss, poverty, segregation. Music wasn't hymn or show, it was prayer. And if sacred music bled outside church walls, that was truth, not disrespect. From then on, Ray vowed, gospel would flow in every genre he touched. Country, jazz, soul, funk. Not to shock, but to testify that the soul knows no boundaries. When he sang "Come Back Baby" or "That Lucky Old Son," his eyes closed not to feel the notes, but to bear their weight beyond sight. Every performance became a quiet rebuke to those who packaged music as product, sanitizing the soul out of it. Ray's legacy is not tethered to bitterness. His critiques were not hate, they were guardianship. He didn't want to tear others down, he wanted the world to remember why the music mattered. Because behind every note lay a story of survival. He understood something many glossed over. When black artists had to bleed for a chance to be heard, a few too perfect songs could unravel a whole era of pain and justice. Perhaps the most haunting question he ever posed wasn't shouted, it was whispered in his notes. What happens when music forgets where it started? As we step into the finale, we unravel not just Ray's story, but the ripple effect on celebrity, wealth, and legacy. Let's talk money. Justin Timberlake, emerging from Mickey Mouse fame into global stardom, today sits on an estimated $300 to $350 million net worth, according to multiple trackers. He owns a fleet geared for prosperity, From a Jaguar F-Type to a $1 million Rolls-Royce Cullinan, even a Bugatti Veyron hustling at 7 figures. His real estate empire stretches from an $8.3 million Hollywood Hills mansion to Tribeca penthouses and ski resort estates. He's co-founded restaurants, launched William Rast Clothing, co-owns Miramichi Golf Course, and invests in tequila, biotech, and even NBA teams. In May 2022, he sold his song Catalog, around 200 tracks, for roughly $100 million. Their strategy here: Timberlake's private Gulfstream GV jet, an estimated $10 million asset, gives him mobility for performances and deals. His watch collection, reportedly rich in high-end brands, signals a lifestyle in motion. He maintains health and asset insurance, though specifics are private, likely to cover multi-million-dollar properties, jet, and public image. Justin's wealth journey offers lessons. Diversify beyond artistry, monetize creativity wisely, and own the content you create. But even as he built a business network and financial fortress, Ray's question lingers. Does the life behind the voice show in the art itself? Timberlake's polished success stands in contrast to Ray's scars-earned soul. As we close this story, we confront that tension. Ray Charles, orphaned and blind, turned suffering into song, negotiating his first master ownership deal in 1959. A groundbreaking move that kept his artistry anchored in his own hands. He built a record empire, Tangerine and later Crossover Records, while leading the fight for civil rights, refusing segregated stages in Georgia. Justin Timberlake, crowned by architecture of fame, engineered synergy between celebrity and commerce, mastering modern music's economic system. He inherited a path Ray helped carve. But here's the question echoing through time. Will his polished songs carry the crackle of struggle, the smoke of sacrifice? Will his wealth signal empathy as much as success? We've watched Ray Charles confront imitation, challenge cooks of perfect melody, and insist on music as confession. Now, in our era of curated feeds and brand partnerships, we must ask, when everything is packaged, who remains authentic? Who remembers the hunger that shaped the music? If this resonated with you, if it made you feel something, drop a comment and let us know what music still moves you. Hit like, subscribe,